In October 1972, in Uruguay, a rugby team was playing a game while being watched by a cheering crowd. After the game, the boys go into the locker room for a bit of fun, chastising one of their players for constantly passing the ball that made them lose the game. The team isn't disheartened by the loss as they have an opportunity to play the game in the neighboring country of Chile. They eagerly discuss their plans for the trip, including the prospect of meeting girls. When Numa and Adolfo find themselves alone, Adolfo implores Numa to join them on the trip, explaining that he will soon be graduating and won't have time for anything but work, which convinces him. A few days later, the 19 team members arrived at the airport, all set for their 4-day vacation. After taking a group photo in front of the airplane, they boarded the flight along with a total of 45 passengers. Midway through the journey, the plane encountered severe turbulence, leading to a crash on a frigid landscape that caused the plane to split in half. Upon regaining consciousness, the startled and injured passengers begin to scream. The uninjured team members quickly spring into action to assist the others and the rest of the passengers. Roberto, a medical student, notices a young man with a severely broken leg and promptly sets it, soothing and calming him as he does so. 4 of the young men, including Numa, rush to the cockpit and see the pilot that was dying. As the man passes away, they attempt to contact help by using the radios, but to no avail. That night, the survivors along with the dead huddle up together to pass the horrible cold of the night, screaming in fear that they are going to freeze to death. The following morning, a few of them survived the terrible cold of the night and seemed to bask in the sun that just started shining. Heading outside of the plane, the group discusses what they remembered happened to the others. They then begin to clean out the plane, hoping to find food, and move the dead out of their only living space. Depressed by their situation, the group gathers around to have their breakfast, and hears a plane passing by overhead. Hoping to be heard, the group begins to scream, but they are unable to reach anyone. As the day goes by, the group begins to try and make their environment comfortable enough for their night by stuffing all the holes with cloth so they're able to keep the cold out. Numa notices the conversation between Fito and Marcelo as the man offers his friend a drink. Marcelo is hopeful that they will be rescued, but Fito is not optimistic about their chances. After another horrible night, their friend Nando seems like he is succumbing to his injuries and wants to spend his last moments with his sister, who is resting in the corner. Crawling toward her and holding her in his arms, he hopefully asks them if anyone has seen them but already knows the answer. Hoping for another plane to pass by, the group hurriedly creates a sign on the ground and is thrilled when their wish is granted. As the plane approaches, they use mirrors they had found to reflect the sunlight and become ecstatic when the plane's wings wobble, assuming they have been spotted. The following day, the group hears another plane pass by, but are unable to see it, which gives them the idea that the search party must be looking for them by classifying the area into zones. Marcel, the enthusiast, tells them that they need to have faith and that they will be found. While they're discussing potions, Numa mentions that there are batteries in the tail of the plane and tells the group that they need to climb the mountains to find them so they can get the radio to work. Agreeing with him, 4 of the most capable began the journey, traveling several kilometers from their crash site to the other. While the group stops to take a rest, Fito realizes that they couldn't even see the plane from their distance, which means the rescuers wouldn't be able to see it either. After their discovery, the group returns, saddened by what they have found. It has already been 6 days since the survivors have had proper food, sharing their last crackers. As the hunger sets in, the group begins to eat whatever inedible thing they can find, including the dead skins on their body. One morning, while Fito and Daniel are sitting outside, Fito tells his cousin that he had heard from Carlito that Nando refuses to die from starvation, explaining that he would at the dead if he had to, which makes the men assume Nando was losing his mind. Fito agrees that they might not have any other choice, which Daniel also supports. Huddled up in the plane that night attempting to survive the heavy storm, Roberto mentions the idea to the group, which is quickly disagreed by Marcelo, who tells him to hold his tongue before he drives everyone crazy. The group begins to discuss the possibility of eating the dead body, which leads to an argument about morality and religion. As they try to agree, one of the men asks the frightening question about who would be able to cut up the bodies. Fito and Daniel volunteer to butcher the bodies, but the others argue if it was even legal, explaining that they would need the consent of the dead if they were to consider it as organ donation. Still unable to reach an agreement, the group begins to eat whatever they can find in the suitcases, including leather shoes. After surviving like that for a few days, Nando wakes up to find his sister, Susana, has passed away. After the young woman's passing, there are now only 27 survivors, struggling to keep on going. On the 9th day, as the group huddles together in the plane to seek shelter from the storm, Fito, Daniel, and 2 others make a pact, agreeing that if they die, their bodies can be consumed by the others for sustenance. The 4 then venture outside to consume the deceased. Subsequently, one by one, the rest of the group begins to rise and head outside to partake in the same. As the rest leave, Numa, Marcello, and 3 others remain on the plane, refusing to eat human flesh. The 3 cousins handled the most painful job every day, the one the rest did not want to do. Fito chose the bodies, and the 3 would take them aside to cut up where the rest couldn't see. Gaining some strength due to the protein, they were able to search around and find some scrap to build a makeshift radio. Those who weren't eating continued to look at the skies, hoping for a sign of rescue. One morning, while sitting inside the plane alone, Numa is approached by Pancho, who offers him meat that is covered in ice, begging him to eat and telling him that the snow made it tolerable, but Numa refuses. Suddenly, the 2 hear screaming from outside and rush to see what is happening. They realize that the others were finally able to make the radio work and had found out that the search for the crashed plane had ended. After the devastating news, Marcello apologizes to the few people who were holding off eating the flesh for giving them false hope and begs them to partake in the meal, taking some for himself. Numo takes 2 of his friends and heads out without prior planning to find the tail of the plane in hopes of finding something. On their way, they find some of their friends and continue their journey, hoping that they are close. Since they had traveled for a long while, they were unable to return in time and were trapped by the night storm. After a miserable night, the 3 men return to the plane and tell the rest of the group that they are unable to find anything. Although Numa has been able to hold off from eating flesh this far, he is unable to do so anymore and finally accepts what they give him to survive, disgusted by himself. As the days go by, the group tries to keep a light heart, able to survive the best they can. While sharing a poem, they are suddenly engulfed by an avalanche that buries them deep within. After the initial shock hits, those at the top dig out to the top and rush to save those who had been trapped inside. As they struggle to do so, they are covered by yet another avalanche which buries them deeper. The survivors begin to call their friends to make sure they're alive, but most of them seem to have died during the first accident. It had already been 17 days since they had crashed on the mountain, and to make matters worse, they were now trapped under a mountain of snow. 2 days after being buried, the group begins to starve once more and fears what they must do to survive. Up until then, the 3 cousins had managed to disguise the meat as food, but in the confined space, they were no longer able to do so. The group watches in disgust as Roberto begins to cut into another one of their deceased friends. Disgusted by the act, Numa begins to try and dig his way out, kicking at the window which breaks and slashes his feet. Unwilling to give up, he continues to dig until he finally sees the sky. As soon as he informs the others, the group begins to dig one by one, supporting one another in getting out. After celebrating their newfound freedom, the surviving group begins to dig out of the plane to help their friends who were trapped inside with broken legs. A few days later, 2 of their injured friends became very sick and passed away soon after. Deciding that they couldn't be there any longer, Numa and 3 others volunteered to head out in hopes of finding civilization and bringing rescue. With his leg infected, Numa had a hard time continuing and decided to head back alone. Once he returns to the group, Numa feels useless now that his leg is keeping him immobile. One morning when Numa opens his eyes, he's surprised to see Nando sitting in front of him after returning from their expedition. He explains that they were able to find multiple suitcases of clean clothes, alcohol, and even rum. He also tells Numo that they have found the plane's batteries and explains that they were taking the radio there to try and make contact. Roy, the group's mechanic, desperately tries to fix the radio, but struggles with the equipment they have. The rest of the group continues to struggle with sicknesses and infection, slowly losing all the strength they have. The food rations were not enough anymore, so they began to strip the bones of the meat. It has now been 58 days since their plane crash, and the group gathered around to listen to the radio, hearing that the Air Force had prepared an aircraft that would resume the search in the mountains. Although they knew it should have come as good news, the group is fearful that the help doesn't believe they were alive. One morning, a group member by the name of Tintin begins to take pictures of the rest of the survivors. Numa begins to feel like he is at the end of his rope and tells Nando to use his body to survive once he is gone. The following day, Numa passes away and is mourned by all his friends. After Numa's death, Nando and 2 other strong men in the group decide to go out and seek help, deciding to travel toward the borders of Chile. After spending several days on the road and horrible stormy nights, the group makes it up the mountains and sees the fast land beyond. As they sit side by side, Nato tells Roberto that he isn't going back, explaining that moving forward is the only choice they have. Their friend Roy returns to the plane so that Nato and Roberto's food lasts longer. Once they say their goodbyes, the 2 men continue their journey for several days until they finally make it to a valley where they're able to light a fire. Feeling energized, the 2 continue forward and arrive at a river where they run into a man on horseback. Excited to finally be able to see someone who can help them, they tell the man about who they are so he can get their information to the right authorities. The man takes Nando and Roberto to his house and feeds them good food. As soon as the authorities hear the news, journalists rush to the farm to meet Nando and Robert, excited to hear the story of their survival. Out in the frozen wilderness, the remaining survivors are warmed with the flicker of hope when the radio interrupts all broadcasting to bring the news of the 2 survivors. Realizing that they will be rescued soon, the group begins to get dressed as they're sure they will be getting photographed by the press. They then collect the belongings of their deceased friends to return them to their loved ones. As they gather around their crashed plane, they spot 2 helicopters arriving with their friends on board, and erupt into cheers, overjoyed at being rescued. On December 22, 1927, 16 survivors returned from the Andes. The families of the survivors come to greet them, unable to believe their eyes and tears washing their faces. As they return to their city, they are accepted by a large crowd who congratulate them on surviving. The survivors are transported to the hospital to receive the vital treatment they require. As the reality of their survival sets in, they collectively recollect their lost friends and mourn their absence, deeply saddened by their inability to return. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.